Hello. Oh, it's working now. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Clinton Center. We are so excited to present the very first program with a conversation with Lindsley Armstrong, Lindsley Armstrong Smith and Stephen Smith, the authors of Stateswomen, a Centennial history of the Arkansas women legislators from 1922 through 2022. We're excited that you all are gracing us tonight to do the first program. And we are having this program under our Clinton Presidential Center Presents series, which is a partnership between the Clinton Foundation, the Clinton School of Public Service, and the Clinton Library. Now, Stateswomen is obviously incredibly timely. After last week's election, women are still chronically underrepresented in the Arkansas legislature. For the upcoming legislative session that begins in January 2023, 5 women will serve in the state Senate. That's out of 35 members. And there will be 26 women out of 100 members serving in the State House of Representatives. However, despite numerous barriers, these women have made their mark at the state capitol. And this book details the 146 women who served in the legislature from 1922 until 2022. So another reason this program tonight is timely is because it coincides with our current temporary exhibit, Women's Voices, Women's Votes, Women's Rights, which explores what Secretary Hillary Rodham Clinton calls the unfinished business of the 21st century, women's equality. And in the exhibit, which I hope if you haven't seen it, you'll make a point to come see it, you'll see that although we have made quite a bit of progress, there is still so much more to do, obviously, here in Arkansas and around the world. And before I introduce the authors, but I think all of you in this room pretty much know them pretty well. And you know that both of them have served in the Arkansas General Assembly. So they are quite familiar with the interworkings of the Capitol and what is asked and expected of members. Lindsley Armstrong Smith earned a JD from the University of Arkansas, clerked for the Arkansas Court of Appeals and the U.S. 8th Circuit Court of Appeals, and served as a research assistant professor of communications at the University of Arkansas, where she taught courses in legal and political communication. She was a member of the Arkansas House of Representatives from 2005 through 2010. Her research has appeared in Frontiers, a journal of women's studies, Communication Law Review, American Communication Journal, Free Speech Yearbook, the Encyclopedia of American Law, Journal of Communication Studies, and the Speech Teacher. Stephen Smith, one of my favorite professors at the University of Arkansas, when I was a student there back in the 80s, holds a PhD from Northwestern University and is emeritus professor of communication at the University of Arkansas. He was a member of the Arkansas House of Representatives from 1971 through 1974, vice president of the Arkansas Constitutional Convention, chief of staff to the Arkansas Attorney General, and executive assistant to Governor Bill Clinton. His publications include 9 books and more than 60 book chapters and journal articles. And our wonderful moderator tonight, and I'm only going to say this is probably the last program, is the new director of the Clinton Library. He's been here since March, so until the end of the year, I'm saying he's new, Dr. Jay Barth. Yay, yay is right. As most of you know, Jay is an accomplished professor and lifelong student of Arkansas politics and my partner in crime here on site at the Clinton Presidential Center. So stick around after the program. Steve and Lindsley will sit for book signing copies of Stateswomen that I think some of you have already purchased. Are there any more left or have we run out? You ran out. I'm sure that they will be happy to sign ones for future. And I'm just really thrilled that we have such a great crowd here tonight. I know this is going to be an incredible program, and I'm going to take my seat so we can get this party started. All right.
What a row. That is just fantastic. Welcome, and thank you all for being here. We are so excited to be here. This is the perfect place for this book to be launched, right here. Stephanie, where'd you go? Thank you. Bridget, Ben, everybody from the Clinton Center, thank you so much for inviting us and having us here to launch our book, Stateswomen, A Centennial History of Arkansas Women Legislators, 1922 to 2022. This is the celebration of the Centennial, and this is an important night, and you are a part of this history. So thank you for being here. Being here at the Clinton School of Public Service is perfect for the launch of this book, because there's one thing that absolutely jumps out of this book, and is the public service of these women legislators. Everybody who has reviewed this and read this so far says that is something that just hits you right in the face. I want to add that it's also a book that's filled with a lot of gutsy women. We went to the exhibit today on women's voices, women's votes, and women's rights. And I've been to a lot of exhibits, including the women's rights at Seneca Falls. And no matter the topic, I have never been so emotionally touched. I'm still emotionally touched. You have to go see this exhibit. And when you do, I really think it will change your life. I mean, I had to keep blinking and wipe my eyes because the tears of joy were blinding me from actually seeing the exhibit. It was that great. It's wonderful. Please go and see it. When women gained the right to vote with the passage of the 19th Amendment in 1920, Arkansas women could still not serve in elected office. However, Arkansas passed a law in 1921 that allowed women to hold office. And in the spring of 1922, Governor Thomas McRae filled 2 unexpired terms in the Arkansas House of Representatives with 2 women, right? Frances Hunt of Pine Bluff and Nellie Mack of Warren. Since 1922, there have been 146 women who have served in the Arkansas General Assembly. Tonight, we celebrate these women, we celebrate the Centennial, and we celebrate the launch of this book, Stateswomen. Now, this book has 2 significant parts. First, we address historically the obstacles and opportunities of women in Arkansas. The second and the larger section of the book provides concise but detailed biographies of the 146 women. The University of Arkansas Press was wonderful to work with. They did an excellent job. David Cunningham, who helped guide us as editor in terms of setting out the original template of what would work with this book, and we followed that, and we rightly did so, and led to, I believe, the book's success. Dr. Janine Perry wrote a wonderful foreword to this book, and Steve and I dedicated the book to Diane Blair. We are appreciative of Dr. Todd Shields, now Chancellor Shields, and the Diane Blair Center for Southern Politics and Society, who Angie Maxwell is the director now, and a grant from the Women's Giving Circle that funded our massive research project and created the nation's largest archive on a state's female state legislators. Due to the large amount of research that led to this book, the University of Arkansas Special Collections now has a file of biographical material for each of these 146 women. It's very important for their families and others to have those files and that information. And for future research, I've also donated over 50 recorded interviews to the David and Barbara Pryor Center for Arkansas Oral and Visual History for their permanent collection. We're thankful to state legislators and their families for providing documents, information, surveys, and doing video biographies that were essential for writing this book. I would ask right now that the women who have served in the Arkansas General Assembly who are with us tonight, please stand and be recognized and honored. That was amazing brain power right there. Thank you for your service. And thank you for being here tonight. Interviews of legislators and their families were the most significant research source for this book. I also see David Ware in the audience, and David Ware was a significant source of research for this book. We want to make sure that as much information about the book, about these women, came from them, about their lives and contributions to Arkansas. For these women, essentially, to tell the stories of their lives, and as much as possible, have it come through their voices. It's impossible to thank everyone who had a part in our 15 years of research for this book and the writing of it. But the book's acknowledgement page, which I will say reads like a who's who of Arkansas, will detail those instrumental people and their contributions to our book. Steve and I went into this book realizing that the best and most accurate history is a shared venture. While the book is an introduction to the 146 Arkansas women legislators, the centennial year of women first serving in the Arkansas General Assembly also provided us the opportunity to address the missing history about how women began serving in Arkansas, in office in Arkansas. The book recounts the impediments that Arkansas women have overcome to make significant contributions to politics and public policy, as well as to celebrate their success in doing so. The book also reconstructs a broad and usable political history regarding female Arkansans, provides role models for women and girls to consider a career in public office, shows the historical significance of women to the success of public service in Arkansas, and provides an important supplement for classes on Arkansas history that recognizes the voices and expands public knowledge of Arkansas women leaders. While the brief biographical entries of the women legislators in the book are primarily descriptive, they also reflect symbolic and substantive influence that representation by women leaders entails. Most were married, but others were single, divorced, or widowed. Most were mothers. Their age when first elected to the legislature ranged from 23, who was Laurjean Rolette, to 74, my colleague and friend Shirley Borhauer. The median age for freshman women legislators was higher than for men legislators because many women legislators were primary caretakers of their children and waited to enter politics until later in life. Their occupations included homemakers, attorneys, farmers, teachers, business owners, librarians, social workers, probation officers, journalists, mayors, county officials, realtors, insurance agents, landlords, state employees, restaurateurs, office managers, nonprofit organization officers, military veterans, nurses, and other medical professionals. They represented urban areas, small towns, and rural locations. They've held high school diplomas and doctorates. They've been Black American, Native American, white American. They were Democrats and Republicans, heterosexual and lesbian, and most were congregants of various Christian denominations. The women legislators' personal pathways to office and the issues they chose to address are very instructive, as you'll discover when you read the biographies. Even without comparative statistics, Jay, it becomes obvious that most of these women had already devoted their time and attention to voluntary public service before assuming public office. And they generally have more formal education than their male colleagues. In selecting stories from the book to share tonight, I'm going to read two excerpts from our book, one from former Representative Stephanie Malone and one from former Senator Ruth Whitaker. Then we have a 15-minute video where you'll hear additional stories. And I noticed that Judy Petty Wolf is here, and there's a pretty large section of yours that just had to keep showing parts. And we're going to show you excerpts from those videos because it's important. Look at that, Tommy and Johnny. It's important that these women's voices are heard themselves. During her first term in 2009, Representative Stephanie Malone, 30, was sitting next to another legislator while waiting for a committee meeting to begin. A member of the staff approached the older legislator and said, "Excuse me, Representative, your daughter isn't allowed to sit at the committee table." Malone, surprised by the comment, remembered, "I will never forget hearing that sentence only 2 weeks into my first term in the Arkansas legislature and realizing they meant me, mistaking me as the daughter rather than the colleague of another state representative." Although she was the youngest woman in the House that year, several of the male legislators were even younger. Yet, as Stephanie noted, I'd be willing to bet they never had to deal with anything like that. Senator Ruth Whitaker remarked, "It's still a good old boys network, but there are some that are now coming around and not being as condescending to us. I think we were an oddity when I was elected." She added, "I think politics for centuries has been more of a man's world, but it has been an unspoken thing. But as more and more women become better educated and more financially independent, it's opening up many doors." The video you are about to see consists of short excerpts from 5 of the many video biographies that I conducted as part of the research for the Arkansas Women Legislators book. Videos that have all been donated to the Pryor Center for their collections. And I'm sure many of you will recognize these women. They are Judy Petty Wolf, Myra Jones, Charlie Colchafin, Jacqueline Roberts, and Becky Lynn.
One thing I used to do, I would get to all meetings early and put my little steno pad. I would scout out the biggest chair in the room. That would be where the governor would be seated. And I would put my steno pad directly opposite that, maybe an hour early. And so that when the room filled up, I could be seated directly in front of him and watch how he conducted himself and feel like I was getting to know him better. And then coincidentally, every time he looked up, he started to see the same face there. And so then he started, who is that? And why is she always here taking notes? And I had just volunteered for, as I said, all the late night sessions and when there was a crisis here or a crisis there. And eventually he started asking that I would be the person who would staff the meetings. And then gradually he would just give me more and more authority. And there was another fellow, Truman Altenbaumer was executive director of the Arkansas Republican Party. He helped promote me too, I think, based on my willingness to work and I hope my skill set, and I'm indebted to him as well. He was from a tiny little town in South Arkansas, I think Alene, Arkansas. I don't know what happened to him. But there were a lot of people who helped along the way. This was about the time that the women's movement was starting. There were women, you may have seen these, they're probably historical now. There was a button that said, "I make policy, not coffee." Have you ever seen that? And women used to wear that. It was a little bit of a chip on the shoulder thing. And I would see that and I would think, that's ridiculous. You're not really making policy. And second, and this will sound real retro, but it worked for me. I made so much coffee so willingly, poured coffee, refilled coffee cups, didn't mind doing it. It put me in where things were going on, and I tried to be like a sponge and absorb how are decisions made, what are the considerations that the people who really do make policy. But a lot of young, ambitious women were wearing those buttons that said, "I make policy, not coffee." And I thought to myself, you're missing the boat. It may have worked for them, but my way worked for me. And then eventually I did make policy. And so I went back to UALR and was within just a few hours of getting my degree when I decided I wanted to run for the United States Congress against Wilbur Mills, who was the most powerful man in America, chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee, and he had been there 36 years and had never had an opponent. I was 29 years old, I believe, at the time, no college degree, and I just decided I would take him on and run against him. And that was an amazing experience, too. That shaped my life in a huge way as well. He had been in office longer than I had been alive, and no one had ever run against him. And I thought, the people at least need a choice. And I knew what I was up against. This totally, I filed on April Fool's Day, which is appropriate. And, oh goodness, I had long hair down here. Oh, I shudder when I think about it, and looked like a young college student, and was. But it was an amazing experience because I just worked my heart out, and I had a lot of good people who were so devoted to, for various reasons, to making that kind of change, just like we made the change when Rockefeller went in after the Orwell-Fabish years. We thought, now it's time to make some changes in the House of Representatives. So we were slowly, he didn't campaign for months and months. He didn't campaign at all. And I can see why in a way, because he could not, the most powerful man in America, he could not pay attention to this mosquito that was running. It was just like a, he didn't want to dignify his opposition by ever showing up to campaign. So he didn't come into the state. And he would send a surrogate occasionally if there were joint appearances. But when we were doing our version of informal polling and we could see something was going on, we were closing the gap. We started out at nothing, and 5 or 10% or 20 or 30. And we thought, this is resonating. And I ran a pretty tough-hitting campaign because there were some ethical issues involved. And I took the gloves off, but I think in a funny way, had a lot of editorial cartoons about the David and Goliath nature of this race. So there was something really going on. And about 6 weeks out, the stripper Fannie Fox jumped into the tidal basin. And it was the first of all the scandals in Washington. And everyone around me, all my volunteers, and that's all it was, they started slapping their thighs and saying, this is it. We're over the top. And I said, this is the worst thing that has happened, because he will be scared and he will now go into high gear. And that's exactly what happened. He went in hiding for several weeks. I mean, the story's well documented. He came back after being, and I mean, he was an alcoholic, so he was sort of drying out. And he came back and turned it into sort of a joke. And he said, my mama told me to watch out for champagne when I went to the big city, and I'd had a glass of champagne that night. And the good people of Arkansas believed it and forgave him. And he was reelected. I still got 42% of the vote, I believe. But the machine came in. It was like being hit head on with a train. And I knew that would happen, and it did. Senator Guy Mutt Jones was a legendary, powerful figure in Faulkner County. And Conway, Faulkner County, which is one of the counties of the 9 in the district, had a big parade every year. And lots of candidates and politicians who were elected were allowed to ride. And so my campaign asked for permission, and we were denied. Again, the power of Wilbur Mills, they did, and Mutt Jones, Senator Jones, was, I guess, parade chairman. And so we were denied a spot in the parade. And I decided that I would walk the parade route. So right in front of Chairman Wilbur Mills, who was seated on the back seat of a long, I believe Cadillac, or some long, big convertible, I walked in front of him, and the crowd loved it. And again, I was maybe 30 years old by then, 29 or 30, and David and Goliath. And it got to be so uncomfortable for him sitting there seeing his opponent in high heels and my little skirt walking, that he stopped his car. He got down out of the convertible and he came over to me. And I didn't know what was going to happen. The photographers just were enmeshed around us. And there's a newspaper clipping I have that has about 20 photos, or maybe 10 photos, big photos of this incident. And he came over and he said, "Why don't you come join me?" Because he was embarrassed at this point. He said, "Come join me in my convertible." And I said, "Sir, you stay in the convertible. I'll walk where the people are." And so he had to turn around and walk back and get back up in the convertible and continue riding. And it was it was a great moment. I didn't realize at the time what an impact it was having, but it was huge publicity over that. It was one of those fun little things that happened in a campaign. That was one of our better days.
And you were the first woman to serve as chair of a standing committee. Is that correct, in the history of Arkansas?
Lindsay, that's correct.
And that's both the House and the Senate.
That's correct.
Wow.
For a standing committee.
Mm-hmm. What did people say anything? Was that heralded? Was that anything different, or was just a matter of fact?
Well, it was unusual, at least on the House side, to have a woman sitting in the chair seat. Mm-hmm. And there weren't as many women as there are men. So it was unusual. I don't know that President of the United States, Bill Clinton, sent me a fine letter congratulating me for that. So I felt real special about that. But it was perhaps not that unusual.
Mm-hmm.
I was pretty proud of it.
That's wonderful.
I was very proud of it. Bobby Hoke was my speaker, and surprised me with that. I had no earthly idea. See, I'd been on city county all the years I was there, served in there, but I had absolutely no idea I was going to get to be chair. I mean, it was a total surprise when he announced it.
Mm-hmm.
I remember that we were the first state in the union to authorize participation in the Women's Military Memorial that was erected in Arlington at the National Cemetery. And I got the bill passed to do that. And my dear friend, Senator Canada from Hot Springs, got the money appropriated. We were the first state to send $10,000 to get that monument done in that in the National Cemetery up there for women who had served in the military, and I was really proud of that. I asked for a mirror to be put in my office because this was all male oriented. The women got a bathroom in the House, but over in the Senate side, I didn't have one, and a restroom. And another time, I was speaking at Girl State. I always was selected to speak at Girl State, and I love to do that because I was a role model for young women, and I recognized that, and I understood the responsibility that went with that. And I had gone to the well and had made this fantastic speech on it is in the tradition of Jimmy Lou Fisher and Julia Hughes Jones and Sharon Priest and Nancy Hall, and went through all that women can serve at the highest councils of state government. It is in the tradition of Hattie Caraway, and I would go through all these women who had done fantastic things. Have those girls on their feet in about 2 minutes. And the first time I did that, Senator Beebe was also one of the people who was speaking, and he was just floored by that. And we started to walk out together, and he said, "I couldn't believe how well you did. That was just so wonderful, and you just did such a great job." And I thanked him, and we got up to the door to go out for lunch, and I just kind of hesitated a minute, and he said, "Open your own damn door."
It's hard, and you probably experienced that. It's hard being a woman because they feel as if you're taking a man's place. And let me digress a little bit here. When I ran my first campaign, I had people to ask me, "Why are you trying to take a man's job?" And I would ask them, "Where is that written? Who said that this is supposed to be a man's job? Is that written anywhere? Show it to me. I'm not trying to take a man's job. I'm trying to do a job. that a woman or a man can do that's qualified. So they don't think you should supposed to be there in the first place. That's the number one strike. And the number two strike, you're there. We don't like it because you're here. You're here, we got to put up with you, but we don't have to like it. That's the number two thing. And I don't know if you could feel that or not, but so many of us went in there in one time until we felt it. And then the other thing is they don't want to take you serious. They want to, I don't know, treat you like, oh, sweetie, how you doing today? Or do those old female jokes that you don't want to hear, that they think that they can say, or anything around you. And then being African American also, don't want me there because I'm a woman. And above that, don't want me there because I'm Black. You know? So it was difficult at first, but being the person that I am, I know who I am and I know whose I am. So what you think about me does not define me or who I am. What defines who I am is me. I define who I am. So I knew who I was, I knew why I was there, and I knew what I wanted to do. So I looked past and beyond that.
Several people lined up, to have questions of Representative Murphy, and he just announced that he wasn't going to take any questions, but that he would take one from the lady, who was me. And I sat on the back row, and so I stood with the microphone in hand and proceeded to ask him some specific questions about how the code was different from current Arkansas law, and why he thought that was a good thing. And I think I asked two, maybe three different questions, and he got completely flustered. And he said something to the effect that, well, sweetie, we'll just leave that to the lawyers. And I responded, and I think how I responded was, but Mr. Murphy, I am a lawyer. And I am trying to understand how this is going to affect the law. I remember saying, but people were laughing so much at that point that, and I don't even remember what the vote was. I don't even remember. I know it didn't pass. I don't know if it passed the House or not. I don't even recall, because at that point, you got to understand, I sat on the back row, and I sat there my entire 3 terms, and I sat with some very jovial people on the back row, and they commenced to start teasing me and calling me, Representative Sweetie. And I was Representative Sweetie for the entire of my next term, and for part of the next term, until finally people let it go. But I would see people in the halls, and they would like, "Oh, Representative Sweetie," and it was really sad, because I really had something to say, and Nat Murphy was such a sweet man, but he had clearly no clue about what he was talking about, and he had no idea that what he'd said was even offensive. And particularly, like I said, my first term, when there were so many what I call old timers there, you kind of got used to it, and you kind of just went to it, because they didn't mean anything offensive by it. I mean, I was a lot of their daughters' ages, and they treated me, or even in Nap's case, I was his granddaughter's age, and they meant nothing. They meant nothing by it. And so when the reporter asked me, I think I said that he just doesn't know any better, and he just didn't. And if it had just, if I could have, if the House hadn't responded the way it did, and I could have, continued the question, but, and I felt bad for Nat, because that's clearly why he was chosen to do that bill, because he couldn't answer the questions, I mean, that's exactly why, they chose him to carry the bill. He was willing, and he wasn't able to answering questions. So that's, I had pretty much by my 3rd term, that was pretty much a forgotten deal. But it's really funny that when you look back and you do a search for Lynn in the Democrat Gazette, that's what you get. But that's the story.
I think these video excerpts demonstrate how valuable it is for Arkansas history to preserve women's voices and their stories in their own voices, that future researchers will have access to these. While our book focuses on the 146 women legislators, we also provide new perspectives on the obstacles that Arkansas women faced and how they seized opportunities to influence both law and culture to make way for women in public office. So the book is a collection of many stories of these women trailblazers and their male allies who supported them in that process. It began more than 150 years ago, Gary Moody will know, with Delegate Miles Langley proposed a provision to the 1868 Constitution to guarantee full and equal political rights for Arkansas women. He was ridiculed on the floor, the proposal never considered, and he wrote to Susan B. Anthony, not even the women supported him in his measure. So our book will provide you with the words and the public arguments in the Arkansas State House, the Constitutional Conventions, and the press. And I think you'll be entertained and perhaps upset by some of the debates. But the research that came from elusive primary sources, and this was particularly difficult in researching women in Arkansas because it hasn't been a main collection focus for libraries. But we used archives and legislative journals and newspapers and the writing of Arkansas women. Arkansas was ahead of many states when it granted white women the right to vote in the 1918 primary election and was an early ratifier of the 19th Amendment. But as Lindsley noted earlier, even though women could vote, they couldn't hold elected office in Arkansas until the law was changed in 1921. In fact, 2 women tried to file in 1920 and were denied the opportunity to do so. But Governor Thomas McRae, who's sort of one of the heroes, signed the law allowing women to hold office, and the very same day appointed 2 women as notaries public who had been denied the opportunity. And when you consider that like 85% of the notaries public today are women, it was illegal until 1921. And then in 1922, he filled 2 vacancies in the Arkansas House with 2 women. And I'm still not sure how a governor gets to appoint legislators, but it's questionable how long it would have taken for women to be elected to the General Assembly without those first appointments. Even today, 14 of our 75 counties have been home to female senators, less than 20% of the counties. And 28 counties, more than a third in Arkansas, have never sent a female representative to the legislature. So what we do in our book, we provide the story of women working their way into the halls of power before they could even vote, and eventually into the General Assembly. We provide, I think, what is a new analysis of the factors that inhibited the development of a progressive political culture that empowered women in Arkansas. Part of that was the geography of a rural southern state, the role of organized religion, legal restrictions on women, and male-only access to the professions. But despite these early Arkansas realities, women persisted. They found doors that were not there to go through, and they made their way through hard work, volunteerism, activism, and family connections to help Arkansas advance, including legislatively from the sidelines. When we look at the research on the debilitating economic and gender systems, but we reviewed the histories of Arkansas in which women, if even mentioned, were treated as trivial. A review of all the Arkansas history textbooks from 1889 to 1966 indicates that women were mostly ignored, and frankly, if mentioned, they were marginalized to separate spheres. One of my favorite legislators, and I could talk about her all night, I suppose, Earl Rutherford Chambers was the first woman to graduate from Arkansas Law School. ranking first in her 1912 graduating class. All of the male graduates in her class were automatically admitted to the bar, an opportunity she was denied. She did an additional year of study at the University of Chicago Law School, was offered a legal position in Milwaukee, but returned to Arkansas, but never got to practice law in Arkansas. Yet she persisted, and she became a state representative in 1923. Several pioneering women and their male allies recognized the potential opportunities and strategies to get women into office even before achieving suffrage. And we detail the positions that women obtained in Arkansas, getting paid government positions, including jobs as U.S. postmasters and legislative clerkships, while being denied appointment as notaries. Federal law prohibited married women from serving as United States postmasters because, as femme coverts, they had no legal rights and couldn't sign the bond necessary to hold office. But these Arkansas women were clever, and single women and widows began receiving postmaster appointments, and seeing women as sort of successful federal employees began to change the public culture in Arkansas. The first woman to hold public office in Arkansas was Mary Murphy Lowe, the 30-year-old widow of State Auditor Harold Lowe and the daughter of Governor Isaac Murphy. She was appointed postmaster at Batesville in 1865. In 1889, Flora Hawes of Hot Springs, and this is a great story the book talks about, proved to be a more adroit politician than Senator Powell Clayton, who had another candidate for postmaster at Hot Springs, but she made her personal application to President Harrison and was appointed and served until she was later married. Shortly after the adoption of the 1874 Constitution, a number of white middle-class women ran for and were elected to legislative clerkships that moved them into the heart of the political sphere. They were pioneers for future legislators. They ran campaigns, they announced months in advance, and they got to be in the room where the laws were made. Among those, Fannie Matthews Jones of Redfield was elected House Postmistress in 1905. In 1922, she became State Representative Frances Hunt. Ella B. Hurst was elected a rolling clerk in 1911, and she later became a three-term state representative. And as we celebrate the centennial of the first women in the General Assembly, we have to remember how slowly change came. Arkansas, we have a governor and a lieutenant governor-elect who are women, and we have more women holding seats in the Arkansas House of Representatives today than the total number who served in the entire legislature during the first 50 years after they were able to vote, or the first 136 years of statehood. It was 42 years before Dorothy Allen became the first female state senator in 1964. After 56 years, Irma Hunter Brown was the first black woman elected to the House, and she later was the first in the state Senate. In 1975, Representative Carolyn Pollen of Fort Smith became the first Republican woman legislator, and she served 24 years until term limits forced her retirement. Another significant change that reflected the state's political shift was that since 2015, there have been more female Republicans than female Democrats in the legislature. The main part of this book is the biographies of each female legislators. They're concise and detailed, but they're really the basis for future investigations, exploring issues of voting records, campaign strategies, committee work, floor debates, indeed all aspects of enacting public policy that still need to be done. We learned a lot researching and writing the book. But I said it was a challenge because of the lack of existing documents and collections. We examined microfilms, newspapers, archives, numerous online databases, and most of these came from conducting oral history interviews with present and former legislators. Another thing you run into if you're doing research on women is you have to unmask them and find out who they were really, because until the 1970s, their mention in the newspaper was Mrs. Husband's name, and you didn't know who they were exactly. We think you'll enjoy reading this book and gain a sort of comprehensive understanding of the research on Arkansas women legislators and their achievements in public office. We're proud of the census, the research, the story it tells, particularly because so little has previously written about women at all, and certainly about women legislators. And this book sort of sets the standard both in Arkansas and nationally. While there's much more to explore and explicate, we trust this book will make that easier. And thank you for being here tonight. I see so many of my friends in the audience. Hope we have time to visit, and I hope you enjoy the book. So thank you.
All right. Awesome. Thank you all so much. And congratulations on this completion of a true labor of love. I've heard about this book for a long time and read parts of it along the way, and I am incredibly proud of you. And I want to thank you for your act of public service because this is really uncovering an important part of the history of this state. So thank you all and congratulations. And it is a great book. Both the biographies are fascinating, but then also the opening section, which really talks about some bigger trends. And I think that's really great and incredibly well written. It's really a great piece. I do want to talk a little bit about the process, which Steve, you were beginning to hint at, that especially in the first decades after women began to hold office, they were very invisible and therefore a century later, really hard to find. And I would love, to talk a little bit about that process and what were kind of the ways in which you just happened upon information about these women that you thought you were never going to find out who they were.
Is that on? Okay.
You're good.
I think one of the most surprising to me was Representative Nellie Mack, the second legislator. She was actually, Governor McRae actually appointed someone else who declined it because she and her husband were moving from Bradley County to Union County. And Nellie Mack comes in. I'd never heard of her before. We tried for months to find a picture of her. We were able to sort of reconstruct her life through newspaper accounts, and her sister-in-law was married to the Attorney General Moose from Morrilton, so there was some overlay and things there. But that was just the most difficult thing to find. But the others, fortunately, David Ware holds the Frances Hunt letters in the state archives, and she had answered a questionnaire sometime in the 1930s or 1940s. Some political science had written to her and asked her a number of questions. So that questionnaire was in the thing. So when you come across something like that, it's a real prize. I know I sound like a nerd, but I just get real excited doing this research. It's like a treasure hunt, and when I find something, it may seem insignificant, but it just makes my day. So that was good.
That's great. Lindsley, Steve talked about Representative Chambers and his kind of fondness for her early story. Was there somebody from those early decades, a woman that just kind of really resonated with you, that person you wish you could invite over to dinner because you found out this kind of really just interesting story? Any of these women that just really resonated with you? Thank you, Ron.
They all just touch my heart. In fact, I brought a list tonight that I wanted to share with you. I started this research project, again, with the grant from the Women's Giving Circle in 2005. And since that time, let's see if I have it right. Since that time, 16 of the legislators since this project began have passed away. And as a tribute to them, I do want to mention their names. When I was talking to the women, and I'll tell you, one of the most fascinating to me, and you'll read her biography, is Dee Bennett here in Little Rock, Dr. Bennett? You know, she was in this top 40 band, PhD. She was, you know, one thing that was really interesting, and you read about these biographies of these women, and one of the saddest things is when you go through the Democrat Gazette and other things and see how they were talking about women. And so many women called furniture. And the sadness to know that because they were using male models of analysis in order to attach to them, and where public service was actually devalued. But there are so many of them. Judy Petty Wolf, I see, we have fun in our interview. You know, is Senator Cecile Bledsoe here tonight? And you know, when we did our conversation, when I went around and interviewing all these women, and I started with Bernice Kaiser, and she might be one that I mentioned as somebody who really stuck out. She was in a nursing home in Little Rock, and her good friend within the legislature was Doris McClaskey. And when I later interviewed Doris, she didn't know that Bernice was then in Little Rock. And it was so wonderful that I was able to get the two of them together, you know, and they had met and rekindled their friendship before, just a few months later, Bernice had died. You know, I mentioned Cecile Bledsoe because, you know, whether Republican, whether Democrat, you know, party just didn't matter. You know, I remember Cecile Bledsoe, you know, I was called liberal Lindsley, you know, and then Cecile Bledsoe is, you know, a Republican. And I tell you what, we just couldn't, after the interview, we couldn't stop talking. We were in her neighborhood street next to the curb, just going on and on about every single issue, including abortion. And, you know, it was just so valuable to see how we were essentially having all common ground on our discussions. So there were a lot of them, but I do want to mention these women. We started this project in 2005, and just during that time period, losing 16 of them, but the value of having those recorded interviews with them or their family. I mean, Helen Buchanan in 2006 passed away. Dr. Buchanan, I interviewed her from her nursing home room in Pennsylvania through her daughter. And just the value of that, and just a few months before she had passed away. But Helen Buchanan, Bernice Kaiser, Veda Shedd, Willie Oates, Doris McCaslin, Shirley Meacham, my good friend Sharon Dobbins, who I served with, who passed away. She was a nurse of pneumonia not long after she left the legislature. Myra Jones, Shirley Borhauer, Ruth Whitaker, Sheila Lampkin, Evelyn Amons, Nancy Balton, Linda Collins Smith, Charlotte Scheck-Snyder, and Carolyn Pollen. In fact, Steve and I just talked to Carolyn Pollen on the phone. One of the pictures you'll find in the book is of her and her daughter Cece. It's a wonderful picture. Carolyn was a big supporter of the Equal Rights Amendment, and they are at a parade. And it's a picture that she had in her kitchen, but it was all faded out. And when we were putting the pictures together and doing the photoshopping and making them sharper, I had colorized, I had really created into a much better picture, framed it and mailed it to her. And actually, Steve and I had a wonderful conversation with her on the phone, and she passed away just a few months after that. But these women, all of them, are my friends, and they touch me, whether they were alive or dead. I really think you're just gonna, there's gonna be such value when you read about them. They're amazing. Women leaders are leaders of Arkansas, all of them.
Excellent.
One of the advantages in the early years, the newspapers covered the legislature much more intensely than they do now. You just get sort of passing deals, and a lot of bills aren't even mentioned. But they go through, like, it's got transcripts of the floor debates almost exactly. And that was one where Earl Chambers was talking, and she it was like the first week when she was there, and she asked some procedural question, and then she said, "I'll be asking many questions like this, but I'll never ask the same one twice." And then she led the ratification of the child labor amendment that Arkansas did. She led that and had some pretty fiery debate comments in that. I'd also like to mention two of the women that I served with in the House, Veda Shedd and Bernice Kaiser, both just lovely women and very, very effective legislators for different reasons and different styles, but I really loved them both.
You know, in political science, we talk a lot about representation and the ways in which representation matters. And I think unquestionably, having a legislative body that looks like the people it represents is important, and we'll take that as a given. But another question is how much the substance of the legislation changes as a result of a legislative body that looks more like the people. And so you've looked at these trends across time. In what ways did Arkansas's public policy differ when women were making decisions as opposed to their male colleagues? Does anything pop to mind?
Yeah, well, I mean, legislation is introduced on topics that would never have been introduced before, and things were passed without even considering the viewpoint of women before when they were brought to that. And I mean, so much of it is just sort of see it and be it, that, you know, for people to see women in leadership roles encourages more women to get in. But it does change the nature of the conversations too, in that, I mean, you look at bills on breastfeeding or contraception or whatever. I mean, there's things that I think it's safe to say a lot of men wouldn't introduce legislation on or even consider it.
Lindsley, anything?
Yeah, in fact, you were speaking earlier, and I was thinking about Shirley Walters. Did she make it tonight, Shirley? Okay. A Republican Catholic, and we both together did the legislation and passed it on requiring insurance companies in Arkansas to cover contraception. And there were I found, and I hope it's still the case, that the Women's Legislative Caucus, that we would meet and we would say, what are the bills that we want to sponsor? And essentially it was, what are people coming to us with? And UAMS, a lot of the medical, you know, they would say, we need these particular pieces of legislation. So like breastfeeding, that was my bill, allowing women, they said, women want to get back to work, but they can't because, and we need to make sure that the breast milk is so important for the baby, but they have to get back to work to make money. There's just no place for them, and you can't just, hey, I'm going to stop breastfeeding. It doesn't work that way. All right. And so we passed legislation, and we did it together as a group to require businesses to provide, you know, unpaid time and a sanitary place, not in a toilet stall, a sanitary place at the place of business for women to be breastfeeding. And it did help significantly with mothers being able to get back to work and also care for the health of their child. There were so many bills like that came to us as a group, and we worked together. And the Women's Caucus, as always, and you'll see that as a trend even in our research, and I hope it's still the case. It's not, it was tremendous, the caucus at the time when I was in.
Well, and that's my last question. And then you guys need to go sign some books. But the camaraderie that you felt, there were probably 12 or 14 women in the house when you were there. Something. along those lines?
About 21, maybe.
Okay,
I
it
think
was a
we
little bit higher because it was
Yeah.
after term limits. To what degree did y'all really kind of share camaraderie as women, and to what degree did that cross party lines? I mean, did you feel in a different place when you were working with your fellow women, or did gender matter as the day-to-day of the legislative process?
I don't know. I think we were all there to 100% support our constituency in Arkansas, that the only thing that mattered to us was doing a great job. And I think that's where we were. And I know Johnny and I mean, so many of us, Joan, remember how we would be in the house? I mean, it would be 5 o'clock at night, and Buddy'd come in and say, y'all need to leave. We have to close up the Capitol. And I will say that we women, we're always working, always helping. There were male legislators, female, or whoever. I would stay in touch with even their constituency. I remember contacting Rick Green one night, and I said, Rick, I'm voting against this bill, but I want you to really take it seriously and look at this bill right here, because I think you're going to want to vote no, because that was in your newspaper about this. Look it over and you examine it. Don't miss this one. Despite what the issue is, I did see that with the women. They weren't going out to big shrimp lobbyist dinners or anything. They went back to their hotel rooms and read until 2 in the morning. I did see a huge difference with that.
Awesome.
Hard workers.
Awesome. Well, Steve, Lindsley, congratulations. And thank you for doing this work.
All right. I wish we could share more.
And for those of you who are able to get books, the book signing is going to take place back in the library. And so y'all can head back there. And there are a lot of great folks in this room who I know are going to want to visit with each other for a while. And so thank y'all so much for coming to the Clinton Presidential Center this evening, and safe travels. Thank y'all.
You.
That means you're extra